This video has been made with the purpose of education and awareness of real crimes, and there is no disrespect intended to anyone. This is to help promote truth and justice for anyone who has been a victim of crime. What I'm about to report is what I have researched online, and I will welcome any corrections should they be required. Hey there, little berries and newberries, this is Berry here. Welcome back to a new case. This one we're going to go to Brazil. Now, you may already be aware of this case because there was, a few years ago, a Netflix special featuring the perpetrator in this case. And it was called Elize Matsunaga, Once Upon a Crime. When it comes to this particular case, the reason I wanted to cover it is because it is uncanny how similar this case is to the Travis Alexander / Jodi Arias case. It's not immediately obvious, but when I was looking into it, I thought this really does sound like another type of Jodi Arias trial. In terms of how the perpetrator tries to paint themselves as the victim and tries to spin the evidence, tries to use the media to fit the least criminal scenario as to benefit their case. So that's one of the things. But as we go on, it will become a bit more apparent. Before getting into the case, I want to apologize in advance if I mess up any pronunciations of any Brazilian Portuguese words, places. I have tried my very best to keep that as authentic as possible, but I'm very, very sorry if I don't do it justice. I mean no disrespect in that regard. Before commencing, I realised during the editing that I had forgotten to put in the trigger warnings, so here they are. This case has themes of not only murder, but dismemberment, domestic abuse, domestic violence, parental alienation, and themes of misogyny and victim blaming. This is the case of Marcos and Elize Matsunaga. In 1960 in Brazil, Yoshizo Kitano established a snack food brand called Yoki, which was a combination of his first and last name, and the word Yoki in Japanese means happiness, enlightenment, positive basically. And Kitano was originally from Japan. He had moved to Brazil where he set up the Yoki company. It became a very popular snack food brand with exciting flavors and varieties of different things like popcorns and seasonings at affordable prices. Kitano grew the company to a great level, making it a multi-million Brazilian real brand. He kept the family in the business, and his grandson, Marcos Matsunaga, who was born in Brazil in circa 1970, was due to inherit the company. In the early 2000s, Marcos had taken an active role in the brand and was very passionate about its purpose. He helped to grow Yoki further and further, and it became a household name. Marcos had been born into wealth and prosperity. He was privately educated, and he knew that he had to work hard to basically keep the company going and to really know how a business worked. He knew he was going to inherit this company, him and his brother and other people. He wanted to do it justice. So his friends at school said that he studied very, very hard. He was very smart, dedicated to learning, and he was a very shy, reserved, sort of person who didn't do confrontation. If anything ever got heated, he didn't really want to have anything to do with it. He was quite a peace-loving man. However, Marcos wasn't really that lucky in love. He did get married, possibly in the early 2000s. I've not been able to find out the details of his marriage or his ex-wife's name. I can't even find out Marcos's actual birthday, and the details of his first marriage have not been made public. But that, to be honest, is not really entirely relevant to this case. Marcos and his first wife ended up having a daughter. Again, her identity has been protected, but Marcos felt that he hadn't found the one. There was something missing in his life. He wasn't happy in his marriage, and it wasn't what he wanted. No matter how much money we have, true love isn't something that money can bring us. Or can it? Marcos's money and connections meant that he could get away with infidelity without many repercussions. If you get involved with somebody where emotions are involved, that can complicate situations. And I believe to mitigate that, Marcos decided that he would hire escorts, high-class escorts. When surfing the high-class escorting site called M-Class, Marcos hired a young woman who went by the name of Kelly, and he hired her a few times, but her real name was Elize Araujo. Elize was originally from Chapecó in Paraná in Brazil and was born into a very poor family. She was abandoned by her father when she was 3 years old, raised by her grandparents and her aunt until she was 10, and then when her mother returned, she returned with a new husband. And Elize found her stepfather to be quite creepy, and at the age of 15, he molested her, and Elize decided that she didn't want to stay, so she ran away and actually spent the night in the woods because she believed she was being followed. But she did eventually return home. However, she knew that to get out of the poverty she was in, to get out the mess she was in, she had to do something with her life. Her grandmother and aunt told her she needed to study if she wanted to get anywhere. So she did. She put herself through college and university, and she became a surgical nurse. Elize moved to Sao Paulo, which is the most populous city in Brazil. And while she was there, she decided she didn't want to be a nurse anymore. It was a bit too much for her. So she decided to make a change of career and put herself through law school. But doing law school, she would need to obviously pay her tuition and make ends meet. And that is not an easy thing to do. And being a nurse is not something she could do at the same time. So Elize turned to sex work to support herself. It was through her job as an escort where she met Marcos Matsunaga. He was 5 years her senior. Although Marcos had hired escorts in the past and never had really gained much feeling for them, with Elize it was different. He hired her several more times, and it became obvious over a period of time that they were falling for each other. It seemed that he really had rushed into his first marriage, and he hadn't given his life a chance to help him find his true princess. But in Elize, he found the love that he really, really wanted, and the business arrangement soon became a personal relationship. Marcos eventually decided that he would leave his first wife for Elize, and when he and his first wife separated, I'm not sure what happened with their daughter. I'm presuming that she went to live with her mother. Elize moved into Marcos's property, and they lived together for 3 years before Marcos's divorce from his first wife was finally arranged. Almost immediately, Marcos and Elize married, and they tried desperately to start a family together. But they did many, many things before that. Of course, Marcos had a lot of work to do. Elize was still going to law school. She quit her job as an escort. Of course, she was now monogamous with Marcos. They went everywhere. They went to Disneyland. They went to Paris. They went to Rome. They swam with dolphins. They went scuba diving. They did all kinds of things together. They documented their travels with video and photos. Elize said that Marcos was very affectionate, and many other people have said the same thing, that he was just so doting and besotted with Elize. He would pull out a chair for her. He was a true gentleman. And the pictures show they just looked like a couple seriously in love. Regardless of how much money they did or didn't have, they were happy. They both loved wining and dining. And another thing they did, which is a very, they hunted wild game. They used to hunt boar, deer. It was Marcos that first introduced Elize to firearms. He liked his guns. He wasn't a huge gun fanatic, but he still, he liked going to shooting ranges and he liked hunting. Elize had never shot a gun, but it turned out she had a real knack for shooting a target, and she really did enjoy hunting. Elize came from a very rural farming environment where livestock were raised for slaughter. Right from an early age, she witnessed animal slaughter and butchery, so it didn't faze her. In the Netflix series, when she talks about this, she says it with a smile on her face. It was normal for her. So going hunting was actually something she and Marcos just loved to do together. And she said in the series that, she really could line up a good shot with a deer. She talked about how she saw a deer from about 1,000 feet away. The deer looked at her, she looked at the deer, and they could see each other, and she lined up a perfect shot. And they would skin the animal, they would remove the bones, they would remove the organs that they didn't need, they would cook them with herbs and goodness knows what. And on one occasion, she actually kept the head and neck of a deer and mounted it on their wall. Elize said she kind of felt sorry for the animal, but the way that she justified it was that they hunted the animal to eat it, not just for the sake of it. Yeah, but if you're that rich, you can afford to not kill a wild animal. You can go to a restaurant and have anything else. She mounted it on the wall, and when one of Marcos' friends came over, he was actually quite, I suppose, horrified. And it turned out, that Elize had killed this animal. And he said, "Why did you kill it?" And Elize said, "I wanted to keep it close." Marcos was so in love and felt that Elize was his future, and he actually stopped attending, or really tapered down his time spent with his friends, to the point that he told his friends that he couldn't really see them that much. He would have to distance himself. And that was unusual because he didn't do that when he was married to his first wife, and he never did that in the past. He said he wanted to start this new life. He wanted to make sure he did it right. They still invited him to get-togethers, but he didn't show up. And so they didn't really see a lot of each other. The Matsunagas also tried desperately for a baby. Elize stopped taking her birth control pill. They tried naturally, nothing was happening. So eventually they tried IVF. And of course, being rich, they could afford the best IVF treatment, but even the best IVF treatment in the world isn't a guarantee. It's sometimes just luck whether or not it takes. And they tried again and again and again, and Elize described it as repeated disappointment. It was just every time she did a test, she just felt, they really wanted a baby. And they carried on with the IVF, but shortly into their marriage, Elize discovered that Marcos was cheating on her. The same means by which he was being unfaithful to his first wife. He was using escorts. The way Elize found out, and this is another similarity with the Jodi Arias Travis Alexander case, is that Jodi started to spy on Travis's email and Facebook and everything. On the occasion that Elize found out, Marcos was taking a shower, and Elize noticed that he was getting a call on his laptop, which was still open, on Skype. She looked and saw it was a female. Now, Marcos had a lot of connections, his business, everything like that. He must have known many females. But Elize felt suspicious enough to see the name on it and then go in to check the chat history with this person. And she believed that they were, from the chat, having an affair. Elize confronted him, saying she was more than willing to leave him, yet she changed her mind when she found out around about the same time that she was pregnant. Marcos was contrite right after finding out that Elize was pregnant. He begged her for forgiveness for his infidelity and promised that he would remain faithful to her. This was a new chapter in their lives. He was happy. And Elize gave birth to their daughter, Helena, in 2011. And shortly after that, Elize graduated from law school. While Elize was in law school, she did actually say that Marcos was quite possessive of her when she was in her classes. He would call her every half an hour to find out who she was with, and her classmates verified that Marcos would often ask to speak to the person that Elize claimed to be with to prove that she was with them. Elize would often say to people, especially men in the background, don't make too much noise because he doesn't want me being around men. And Elize tried to say to Marcos, I'm at law school, I'm learning in a classroom of men and women. Of course I'm going to be around men. There's no way of getting around it. But I believe the jealousy was two ways. That he feared that Elize would cheat on him, and I think maybe they were just jealous of each other. In 2012, it became apparent that there were some conflicts within the Yoki business as to who would take the company on after Marcos's father retired, and there were some disputes as to who that would be. Ultimately, the Kitano Matsunaga family decided that they would sell Yoki to the American company General Mills for 2 billion Rias. I apologize if I mispronounced that. Around the same time, Marcos and Elize had decided to go into a business venture together, wine. Elize had qualified and worked as a nurse. She worked in theatre, she had worked in mental health institutions. She'd gotten a law degree, so technically she was a qualified lawyer, and now she was studying wine, so she was becoming an oenologist. This was going to be her and Marcos's new venture, so they did actually set up a company together. And this was what they planned to really take off as soon as Yoki was sold. The sale of Yoki was due to go through towards the end of May in 2012, but that week Marcos failed to attend some important business meetings and nobody could get hold of him. The pastor that married Elize and Marcos received an email from Elize on the 21st of May 2012, which said that Marcos left home 2 days prior and hadn't been seen since. She asked the pastor if he knew anything or had heard from Marcos, which he hadn't. However, he did assume that Elize had had an argument, had some problems, and Marcos had just taken a break, was blowing off steam, was just having a bit of a break from Elize, and that Elize was having a bit of a break from him. The pastor tried to email Marcos, but received no response. What was concerning was that this was just a few days before the finalization of the sale of Yoki was to go through. Had a business rival kidnapped him? Elize went to Marcos's family and asked if they'd seen him, and they hadn't. She reported that he'd left the apartment they shared on Sunday, the 20th of May 2012, to prepare for a meeting that was due to take place the next day, and he told her that if he ended up working late, he may sleep in the office to ensure he could get to the meeting early. However, she told Marcos's mother a different story. Elize told Marcos's mother that Marcos had once again been unfaithful to her, and she had video proof of this. Marcos's mother was so shocked, saying she didn't raise her son to be like that. They said regardless of what happened between them, regardless of where he is, they would take care of Elize. She would have nothing to need for the rest of her life, because of course they had a daughter, and it looks like Elize was the victim here. Elize told Marcos's mother that she had actually shown Marcos the same proof that she had, and Marcos said to Elize he'd had enough. He packed a few things, he packed some money, and Elize believed that he had gone away to be with his mistress. 5 days after Marcos went missing, his brother Mauro received an email saying he was alive and well, but he couldn't talk right now. Elize immediately relaxed. She said, well, at least we know he's alive. And what was also odd is that he was saying he was okay, but if this was a kidnapping by a business rival, there was no ransom. So people were actually of the belief at this stage that Marcos had indeed walked out on his wife and child because he'd found someone new. A few days later, around 20 miles south of Sao Paulo, on grass verges either side of a dirt road in Cochia, garbage bags containing dismembered body parts were found, and it was confirmed through dental records that this was indeed the body of Marcos Matsunaga. His head had been severed. A bag containing his bloody clothes were also found. So the fate of Marcos Matsunaga had been discovered. He had been killed, and he had been dismembered. His head also showed how he died, a single gunshot wound to the head, but his throat had also been cut. His torso was discovered in another bag, and it showed blood in his lungs and airways, indicating that he had indeed had his throat slit and then was later dismembered, or he may have been alive when he was dismembered. When the pathologists did their examination, there was a bit more to this than just a simple gunshot wound and dismemberment. This dismemberment was done by someone who was very skilled in finding the appropriate joints and making clean, precise cuts, and even a cut on the abdomen without perforating the bowel. There were no marks on the bones where someone had gone over and over them. Whoever did this had detailed knowledge of human anatomy. They knew exactly what they were doing. The police described this as much as this type of butchery and savagery as coming from someone who hated Marcos. Someone cut him up physically with as much hatred as they did with precision. When the police questioned the family, they asked Marcos's brother Mauro about Marcos's life, and he said yes, he was married. And when they asked what his wife's occupation was, that's when they found out that before she had met Marcos, she was a nurse. A nurse would have detailed knowledge of human anatomy. A few days after Marcos's body was found, the police went to the Matsunaga's apartment to conduct a forensic search and also to study the CCTV footage of the lifts of the building. They lived in a penthouse in a high-rise, posh building, rather modestly, but still it was quite high up, and all the lifts had CCTV, and there was some other CCTV around the building. It showed in the lift all three of the Matsunagas, so that's Elize, Marcos and Helena, plus their daughter's nanny, together with Elize's suitcases because she'd been away for a few days, before they left the lift to enter their apartment. This was around 6:35 p.m. that night. At 7 p.m, Marcos Matsunaga is shown on the same CCTV in the lift going down to the lobby to collect a pizza. Whilst in the lift, he angrily kicks the lift, showing that something had triggered some sort of anger in him. Yet he waits until he's away from his wife and child, not just outside of the room or outside the apartment. He's in the lift going down, he waits a while, and he takes his anger out on an inanimate surface, but just with one single kick. So it may not have been a huge thing, but something had triggered that. Marcos returns with the pizza, but looking through all of the CCTV footage, he is never seen leaving the apartment. He basically goes into the apartment with the pizza and vanishes. What was interesting though as well is that Marcos was seen wearing the same clothes that were found by his body parts in Kochia, a pair of diesel jeans and a Ralph Lauren sweater, expensive clothing. That is exactly what he was wearing when he died, because those clothes were covered in blood and they were found next to his body. So he must have been killed that night. Although Marcos was not seen on CCTV footage again, Elize was. The following morning, which was Sunday the 20th of May 2012, so this all happened on the 19th of May, she was seen getting into the lift and dragging 3 very heavy looking suitcases with her, using one to prop open the door, and while it was open, then dragging 3 with her. Her daughter wasn't with her. She appeared to be alone. There was no Marcos with her. He wasn't anywhere to be seen, but it was from looking at this and then viewing all the rest of the CCTV which proved that Marcos did not leave that apartment on his own. Marcos was in the CCTV footage, but he was in pieces, literally. He was in those 3 suitcases. This was how Marcos left the apartment. Just before midnight, the day that Elize leaves, she's shown returning to the apartment without the suitcases. Cell phone towers also showed that Elize was indeed in Kochia at the time that someone saw someone dumping the blue garbage bags in the undergrowth. The police officer in charge of the investigation asked Elize outright, "Why did you kill Marcos?" They knew at this stage that she was the one responsible. Who else could it have been? Elize paused, said nothing for a couple of minutes, and then she said, "It wasn't me." But the police knew that she was lying. So Elize was arrested in June 2012. When at the police station in June 2012, Elize confessed she had indeed shot and dismembered her husband, but she maintained that this was a case of self-defense, a crime of passion, and not premeditated. Here is the story that Elize told the police. For the first 6 months after Helena was born, everything seemed to be okay, but the marriage soon began to fail. The argument started again. They had some problems leading up to Elize's pregnancy, culminating in Marcos's affairs, but this time it was different. Marcos, according to Elize, was not a hands-on father. He said he had to go out for a lot of businesses, but Elize was suspicious. And his temper changed. He went from being a very quiet person to being angry and shouty, which was not like him. In May 2012, nearing the time that Yoki was going to be sold, Elize went back to her hometown with her daughter to visit her grandmother, who wasn't very well. But just before leaving, Elize hired a PI, a private investigator, to follow Marcos, because Elize suspected that he was once again being unfaithful. Now, according to Elize, Marcos would hold her past against her as a sex worker, saying that she wouldn't find any man who would love her, saying that she'd only ever find men who would fuck her pussy. The PI followed Marcos, and on the 17th and 18th of May 2012, he filmed Marcos in the arms of and kissing another woman. They went to the same restaurant that Elize and Marcos frequented, and they were familiar with the staff, and Marcos was being so blatant in front of people who knew who Marcos's wife was, with another woman. They then went to a hotel. Heartbroken after hearing this, Elize returned to Sao Paulo on the 19th of May 2012, obtaining the footage from her PI. She met with Marcos at the airport, and they went back to their apartment at 6:35 that night. Soon they dismissed the nanny, so it's just Marcos, Elize and Helena at the apartment. They ordered the pizza. She mentioned that Marcos, at some point, she couldn't remember if it was before or after he went to get the pizza, he got a call that made him quite nervous and was quite cagey. Elize believed this to be from his mistress, and she tried to keep it together. She didn't really want to have it out with him that night. Elize says that after they ate the pizza, Marcos said he had to go to his dad's house. It was at this point that she just couldn't take it anymore, and she confronted Marcos with the accusation that he was being unfaithful. He told her she was crazy, threatened to have her committed to a mental institution, that he already had one lined up, and apparently this was not the first time he'd said this to her. Also, that Elize would not be able to see their daughter, that if Elize wanted to leave, she could leave, but to leave Helena with Marcos. Marcos threatened her with a hit as well, saying that if she dared to take her daughter back to Paraná, that Elize would be shot. Then, for the first and only time, according to Elize in their marriage, Marcos slapped her across the face. Elize was so angry. She walked away, went to the cabinet, got her .380 pistol, which Marcos had actually gifted to her, and she pointed it at Marcos from the entrance to the room where they kept the gun. He was in the hallway opposite her. He was just 6 feet from her in the hallway. He goaded her into shooting him, saying, "Shoot me, you coward, shoot me, or get out." He was advancing towards her, so she shot him. Elize claimed that she shot him here in the head. She knew that the single shot killed him. If you shoot someone in the head, 99 times out of 100, it kills the victim. Elize was faced with the dead body of her husband. She had a decision to make. Call for help, confess, and lose her daughter immediately? Or she could get rid of Marcos, buy herself some more time, or quite possibly, maybe, even get away with this. She chose the latter. Taking Marcos's wrists, she dragged his body halfway through the apartment into the bathroom. She then got some kitchen knives and set about dismembering him, but claims she was kind of in a bit of a fog or had a foggy memory of what happened after she shot him. It's almost as if she didn't say this herself, but the way she describes it is she was on autopilot. She was just desperate and just did what she had to do. One notable quote from Elize, now this is translated from Brazilian Portuguese to English. "I still can't tell what kind of emotion made me pull that trigger." There's a lot to unpack here, but basically she is distancing herself greatly in this. The word "I" and "trigger" are right at the very ends of each other part of the sentence. Pull that trigger. So basically, pulling the trigger is what she did, but she's still not admitting to killing her husband. She's still not saying, "I still can't tell what kind of emotion made me kill Marcos." She doesn't use his name. She doesn't say kill. She doesn't actually mention the crime she committed. Pulling a trigger itself isn't a crime. But killing someone by pulling a trigger is. So she is, again, distancing herself. She's also inserting the emotion in there. She's not saying, "I still can't tell what made me pull that trigger," or "I still can't tell," or "I still can't say why I pulled the trigger." One of the closest, less distancing things she can say is, "I can't tell you why I killed Marcos." Even then, that's distancing. She's putting I and Marcos apart, but at least it is a lot better than this. From this sentence, she is still very much trying to minimize her personal involvement here, saying it was an emotion and it was the trigger, as if as soon as she pulled the trigger, it was entirely up to the bullet as to what happened after that. So she is still not taking full responsibility, in my opinion. Just after Elize's arrest, she was escorted back to the apartment to take part in a reconstruction of the crime, with an officer playing the part of Marcos according to Elize's direction, and a dummy to show how she moved the body. Now, this dummy actually had the bullet wound here. Now, that is important. We're going to come back to that soon. Elize said that they were sat at the table, they'd eaten dinner, Marcos was sat at the end of it and she was to his right along the long side of the table. Elize accused him of cheating. He started cursing, calling her names. She said that Marcos stood up, cursed at her. She stood up. He slapped her around the face and apparently said, "You think I'm like your dad? I'm not a bum." Elize said those were his exact words, but it's unclear if he meant Elize's real dad who abandoned her or the stepfather who molested her. It could have meant both. Marcos then used her past against her, saying that she was in the trash, he got her out of the trash. Elize walked away and got the gun, and she said the reason for that was because she was scared of him, of what he could do. He'd slapped her across the face, and he'd never done that before. She felt this was escalating, so she feared for her life. She felt that he'd lost his mind. Elize also mentioned that she'd been sleep deprived ever since the PI called her while she was in Paraná and told her, "Your husband is being unfaithful." She hadn't slept. Now, she said at one point 3 nights, another time she said 2 nights, but either way, she says she was sleep deprived. Marcos also seemed to not be himself, so possibly both of their emotions were all over the place. The way that Elize describes Marcos at this point is in stark contrast to how he had been before with her, and also complete opposite of Marcos' school friend of 25 years, saying that Marcos never lost his cool, he never raised his voice, he would prefer to stay silent than argue. But to be honest, You never know what someone is going to be like with their spouse, because what they are like outside with their closest friends and even their parents or their aunts and uncles or business people is very different to how they would be with their spouse. So I'm not sure exactly what to think of that, but we can't dismiss it, but at the same time, we don't have any evidence for it either. So again, she said with this reconstruction, she went to get the gun, she was holding the gun, Marcos approached her, he was 6 feet away, he goaded her, and she shot him from 6 feet away. Yet, the forensic evidence that the police gathered contradicted her testimony and this reconstruction. Remember what I said about the dummy in this reconstruction? It had a bullet wound in the forehead because that's where Elize says she shot him. But the autopsy revealed that the bullet had entered the left side of his head in a downward trajectory. Again, very much like Travis Alexander, bullet head entering here. And Jody, didn't she say that she shot Travis while he was goading her and coming towards her? Yet he was shot here, downward. It doesn't make sense. There was no way she could have missed and the bullet ricocheted and gone down into his head that way, because there was no bullet mark anywhere at all in the apartment. And Elize was short. She was only 5'2", and Marcos was 5'9". 2 meters away. If Elize had held the gun, even if she held it at head height, which she probably wouldn't have done, if she'd held it sort of about here, the trajectory would have been upward, but then that's assuming she'd hit him in the middle of the head. But she didn't. It went here and then downward. But how could a shot head on get into his head that way? This could only have happened if she had been at a higher vantage point than Marcos, pointing the gun downwards, and he was facing away from her. Physically speaking, that's the only way it could happen. Additionally, and this was irrefutable, the pathologist found that around the entrance wound of the bullet there was tattooing or burn marks that could only be made by gunpowder from the gun if it were being held at his head less than 20 inches. There's no way that Elize shot him from 6 feet away. And additionally, there was an exit wound. From 6 feet away, you wouldn't necessarily have an exit wound. The police believe that Elize was waiting behind the door when he came back with the pizza, that he crouched down on the floor and she shot him as soon as he came in. I'm not sure how they got that. They haven't revealed how they found that, but they believe that he was in a crouched position, or she had approached him while he was sat down, and that's how she shot him. Now, common sense shows that that is most likely. They also believed it was premeditated, that she had planned to kill him as soon as she found out about his infidelity. And she shot him basically out of rage. So if she was close to him, he was not looking at her. He was lower than she was. As she shot him in the left temple, this was in no way self-defense. The type of gun used and the amount of powder burns on Marcos's head shows that she was at a maximum 20 inches or just over 1.5 feet away. The defense argues that the forensic report was false. They claim to be able to say it was fake by saying that Marcos could have indeed been shot in the way Elize was saying. They had a computer simulation generated to, quote, prove it. But they didn't actually prove it, other than that they showed the possibility that Elize may have killed Marcos in the way she described. The simulation shows that at the point she shot Marcos, when he was advancing towards her, cursing and shouting at her, he then crouched down as he believed she was going to fire, and that's how the bullet entered his head that way. But Elize had never said to the police or anyone, I saw that the bullet wound was here. She claimed it was here. So you can't make that mistake. It was either here or here. At this point, I'm actually going to say what my personal thought is. Now, I think this is unrealistic. If you're in a narrow hallway and someone is pointing a gun at you, would you approach them until you are that close to them and then duck? How would he know she was about to shoot as she didn't fire any warning shots? And what caused him to duck? And what caused him to duck and then her managing to actually follow his head down and shoot him at the moment? Approaching her like that, shouting and cursing, meant that he didn't think that she'd shoot him. So what made that switch happen? I don't think that he would have approached her in that way if she were pointing a gun at him. I believe he would have got out of the situation. If someone is pointing a gun at you, you don't walk at them shouting and goading them and making them angry when you know that the reason they're holding the gun and pointing it at you because they're angry. I'm going to postulate another theory. This is my opinion. I don't think I've heard anyone else say this, but it might be something else that people have thought of. Is that one explanation is that he was indeed approaching her. But he was approaching her to try and talk her down, to try and calm her down by saying, "Darling, give me the gun, put the gun down." But if Elize had said to the police, "Look, he was trying to talk me down and I shot him anyway," this would make it look like a lot more like cold-blooded murder rather than a crime of passion. He may have got down on his knees. He may have done that to show that he wasn't a threat. She may have told him to kneel with his hands on his head, and then she may have approached him and shot him that way. But if she confessed to it happening like that, there's no defense she could have to say that this was self-defense. She would get the maximum sentence. So my view is that she is not being entirely truthful here. She then cut him up into 7 pieces, scattered his remains 20 miles away, lied to everybody, even faking contact from Marcos, making his own family see what a bad husband he was and that he'd walked out on his wife and his child. So Elize spun this web to show she was the victim of an unfaithful, abandoning husband. One thing that Elize's defense team said, which I completely understand, and I'm not defending Elize here, is that once Marcos was dead, dismembering him didn't hurt him anymore. So he wasn't conscious to know what was happening to him. He was already dead. It was a body. It was an inanimate body. There's no more distress that she could inflict on him, even if she had dismembered him, even in a more brutal fashion, because he was already dead. I get that. But just moments before, this person was animated and had been in her life for about 6 years at this point. She travelled with him, lived with him, had a child with him. This is a human body of someone at one point she supposedly loved. To cut up any dead body, especially a freshly dead body of someone to whom you were married, takes a lot of gumption. As Marcos's school friend said in the Once Upon a Crime Netflix series, quote, "She had to disconnect from her humanity to be able to go through with it." And I absolutely believe him. Elize also said that in her nurse training, they taught them how to distance themselves emotionally. So I think here is where she utilised her nurse training as well. But there was also the matter of the blood in Marcos's airways and lungs. This was pivotal in the case because if Marcos had been alive when Elize began to dismember him, that brings that cruelty aspect way back into play. The pathologist had to examine Marcos's body parts at different times due to him being in pieces. When the lungs were examined, it showed his airways were full of blood, a lot of blood. They believed that this meant that Marcos hadn't died from that single gunshot wound to the head, but was alive when Elize began to sever his head, leading to blood to fill his lungs as he tried to breathe, causing him to asphyxiate. A headshot wound is nearly always fatal because the brain is what makes us alive. It sends signals to other parts of the body to function, and if the brain is perforated, death is almost always instantaneous and inevitable. But not always. There are some cases where people have been shot in the head where the bullet misses the brain, it skirts around the brain sac, or it lodges in the place of the brain without causing the brain to shut down. Elize was a surgical nurse. Surely she would have known that even with a headshot, she could have potentially saved him. Did she check for signs of life? Elize's defense said that the blood in the lungs could have been there post-mortem. When Elize cut into his neck, this is where the blood entered the airways, but it was not the cause of death. Elize said that Marcos was not alive when she dismembered him, but if he was, she didn't know. The defense managed to arrange for Marcos's body to be exhumed. They checked the bullet wound to the head, and it showed that it did actually hit vital points for his brain to function. So the pathologists had to concede that Marcos was not alive when he was dismembered, and that the blood in the airways were caused when any blood that was in his head had somehow gone down into his lungs just as his throat was being cut. Elize said she knew that one day she would be arrested, but it was just a question of when. She was a nurse, a trained lawyer. She was a very smart woman. She must have known that the best option was to confess at the outset, to try and render aid to Marcos, however fruitless. Even if it is fatal, at least then she could face lesser charges and have a better chance of having a life and relationship with her daughter. One could say Elize panicked, decided to cover it up because she was desperate, and that's exactly what her defense team said. They said anyone in that situation would do the same thing. I'm sorry, but not anybody would. But considering nobody else was a witness to it, the scene, in a state of panic, could you really drag your husband's body halfway around an apartment, cut him up with the same precision that you learned as a nurse and as a huntress, because she hunted in the woods with him as well, and place him into suitcases, scatter his remains miles away, then lay a trail of breadcrumbs to portray him as a man who chose his mistress over his wife and child? This again, exactly what Jodi Arias did. Tried to lay a trail of breadcrumbs pointing to her either not having done it or that she was the victim. Elize was arrested in June 2012, as I said, a month after committing the murder. She went into prison on remand and she never made bail, and it was a decision apparently by the defense team to try to not get her bail because they knew that she would receive a sentence. It just depended on how much, and the longer she was on remand, the more credit she'd receive. Otherwise, she'd have to start the sentence from scratch if she were out on bail. Elize kept saying that she was thinking of her daughter throughout all of this, but Patricia Cadisi, a lawyer for the Matsunaga family, quoted this at the beginning of the series, which I think this was absolutely gold. I don't believe she was thinking about her daughter. If she had been thinking about her daughter, she wouldn't have done what she did. From the moment that Marcos went missing to the trial at the end of 2016, so 4.5 years, it was a media storm, and the people were coming down on all sides with this case. Many people defended Elize, saying she was assaulted, so she was defending herself. Even her prosecution lawyer's mother criticized her son for trying to convict this, quote, poor woman. This shows how the media can spin something to make a perpetrator look like a victim. And Patricia Cadisi, she pointed out as well that if Elize had any thought about her daughter, she would never have done the Netflix special. She'd have saved everything that she wanted to say for her daughter. Elize was charged based on 3 aggravating factors. Motive? Was it anger, vengeance, possibly money? The second was the cruelty involved in the dismembering. And the third was that her husband had no way of defending himself. Elize was portraying herself in the trial, and she has portrayed herself since as a victim of domestic abuse and that one instance of domestic violence. Elize and her legal team tried to push the narrative that this was a crime of passion. A crime of passion used to be used in many countries as a good defense, because in many cases of self-defense, it's either you or that person, and you have to make sure that your defense fits the situation. So if someone slaps you, you don't get a gun and shoot them, for example. There are cases, though, where people have confessed to killing someone but out of a fit of rage in the spur of the moment. For example, coming home and finding your lover in bed with somebody and you kill them. Those kind of things are not usually premeditated. They are spur of the moment, fueled by anger because of something that the victim did. And it's not typical of their character. And many people in the past have managed to convince juries that this was because it's their first time ever doing anything wrong. It was an exceptional circumstance. They're not by nature a killer. And some people have actually been acquitted of murder using the defense of crime of passion. I don't believe you can do that now. Elize's legal team asked that she be given a 3-year sentence, so something akin to manslaughter. So with all of these aggravating factors taken out of the equation, but the fact that she confessed to shooting him, she couldn't get out of that. This was also sparked by her, doing this on the spur of the moment. It was just anger and a single mistake that she would never have done if her husband hadn't pushed her. Another strategy by the defense was, at the time of the trial, or just before the trial, Elize had dyed her hair red, but her legal team told her to dye it back to blonde as it was at the time of the incident. She was also afforded the right to wear civilian clothes rather than jail garb, exactly as it was with Jodi Arias, making her look like a small, frightened, timid, weak librarian type, a soft-spoken, sweet woman who was only acting to defend herself. And just like Jodi Arias, Elize Matsunaga took the stand in her own defense. The prosecution tried to focus on the Cinderella-esque princess life, rags to riches element of the case, saying that a woman from a rough and humble upbringing suddenly had the life of royalty and she was simply a gold digger. If Elize had stayed with Marcos, she'd have remained in that luxury, but she'd not have been happy. If she'd left, she would have been poor again, apparently. The only thing I would say, and I am not defending Elize, is that she had proof of his infidelity. When you divorce someone on the grounds of adultery, or you are seeking alimony on those grounds, you need to prove it, and she had proof. They also had a business together, and they would need to work together, or he would need to buy her out one way or the other. And so I don't really think money was the main thing here. Maybe it was in the background, but I certainly don't think this was a major part of her motive. If you think back to the Jodi Arias trial, Travis Alexander wasn't there to defend himself, but he was basically put on trial. He was portrayed as the horrible boyfriend. And in this case, Marcos Matsunaga, a man again who was not there to defend himself, he was put on trial. The defense scrutinized Marcos's history, said they had dirt on him that would put the advantage in the court of Elize. Marcos had not only been unfaithful to his first wife with Elize, but he was doing exactly the same thing with this new woman he was seeing. The woman with whom he was seen kissing and fondling with outside of the restaurant was tracked down. Her name was Natalia, and she was an escort from the same site, M-Class, where Marcos found Elize. Natalia and Marcos had been more than escort and client. They had plans to marry and move to Miami, apparently. And it's possible that Elize saw that history was repeating itself. She had been the escort who then became the other woman. Marcos, with his first wife, already had a daughter. And now Elize and Marcos have a daughter. And now Marcos went back to the same escorting site, found another escort, was falling or had fallen in love with this new escort. So Elize was livid. I'm going to keep saying it, go back to the Jodi Arias thing. The spark for Jodi to kill Travis, a lot of people said, was that Travis had chosen Mimi Hall over Jodi and was going to take Mimi on holiday and not Jodi. The defense also found, according to another escort, that Marcos was frequenting forum sites under the username Whore Rider, rating escorts, detailing what they did. Yet, as a friend of Marcos's pointed out, this doesn't justify what happened to him. You can't say because a man is unfaithful to his wife and that he was using escorts that he deserved to be shot in the head. because at that specific moment in time, that wasn't the issue. However, the prosecution, I'm sorry, were no better. They used Elize's past against her. Now, she is the perpetrator. She's the one who shot Marcos. But I absolutely hate the fact that some prosecution and defense attorneys can use the past of the perpetrator against them to try and make their point that they were as evil as they made out. You need to look at the actual crime. And like with Jodi Arias, they used a lot of the sex life she had with Travis and her past and everything. And they also used a lot of Travis's past against him, that he was a Mormon who was violating the Mormon code, all of that. So again, the same thing was happening here. The prosecution made Elize look like a gold-digging whore who had little morals, little principles. The judge in charge of the custody hearing of Helena requested a DNA test before overturning Helena to the care of Marcos's parents to determine if Marcos was indeed Helena's father. And he was. Now, she could have been conceived as of IVF or naturally, but either way, she was his daughter. When the defense refuted the autopsy and forensic reports, they were pretty much successful in proving that Marcos did indeed die from the gunshot wound. However, the prosecution didn't stop there. They really went very far. They argued that the cuts that they saw were so precise on Marcos's body that someone's expertise in butchering animals is not enough to demonstrate the expertise here, as the human body anatomically is very different from a boar or a deer. And the prosecution and the police believed that Elize had help, that there was no way she did this alone. They also realized that some of the incisions and cuts, some were done in an extremely pristine surgical standard way, and some were a bit more haphazard. The CCTV didn't cover every part of the building, particularly where Elize's car was, leading the police to believe that Elize didn't act alone. But nobody was seen leaving the apartment, yet I don't know how they could have determined that from the lift CCTV, because someone could easily have left that apartment and just walked down the stairwell. They also argued that there was DNA and blood in that apartment from 3 individuals, 2 males and 1 female. So there was Elize, Marcos, and another person. But the defense said, well, how do you know that was from the same time? When Elize went into the underground parking lot and loaded her suitcases into her car, she drove west for a while, and she said she was going to go home to Panama, and then she decided against it because she didn't want to involve her family. So she drove back, veered off, and before disposing of the body, she was actually stopped by the police for having an expired license. She was given a ticket, but the police officer who stopped her was never questioned to determine whether or not she was alone in the vehicle. And this was before she had got rid of the contents of those suitcases. After going through all of this, they found that there was a doctor living in that apartment building. There were 3 doctors living in another apartment building, but they felt that questioning people and bringing them into it when they maybe had nothing to do with it was just, it wasn't in their best interests. There was possibly a bit of classism here, is that there were people who had very high-class careers such as doctors and lawyers in these buildings, that they would not have been so respectful of people's lives and careers if this had taken place in a poor neighborhood. But who can say? Eventually, the line of inquiry about a third person being present or an accomplice for Elize was abandoned. The trial lasted 7 days, and the immediate attention was exponential. The defense told the jury about Elize's childhood trauma, and they wanted to bring this to the surface. And they tried to emphasize that Marcos was a bad husband, and they felt that the jury would probably take Elize's side. They wanted to humanize her and make her look like the frightened woman that they believed she was. But it's irrelevant in the moment. However traumatic your past, how awful the victim has been to you, does not mean that in that moment you are justified in physically going to the gun cabinet, getting the gun, coming back, and pointing the gun and deliberately firing it and then dragging the body away, cutting it up, dismembering it, and then going around everybody making out that you are worried for them and telling their family how bad they are and telling everybody that you don't know where they are and spinning these lies and manipulation. When I watched the Netflix special, it was obvious looking at this that this special was another attempt to make Elize look more like a victim than a perpetrator. I'm not saying it was all completely one-sided, but that's what it seemed to be. But I didn't buy her poor me approach in this. I find it infuriating that she talks about how horrible jail is, that she'd been through hell, that the trial was so stressful, she'd never been stressed like that. Hang on. She said that her marriage was stressful. Killing and cutting up her husband's body, that wasn't as stressful. She's been through hell. What about her daughter, who was robbed of a father? What about Marcos's family who loved him? And his parents who are raising their granddaughter? What about Elize's family who have to go through this too? Helena Matsunaga was robbed of a chance to get to know her father, and Marcos Matsunaga was robbed of the chance for watching his daughter grow up. She was a year old at the time of his murder. Elize grew up without a father. And in the Netflix series, I actually laughed when she said this. She said, "I grew up without a father, and that absence, that bad feeling, I didn't want my daughter to feel that." She said this is why she worked hard on their marriage and why she forgave Marcos's first affair, once again saying how wonderful she was for how she tried to give her daughter the father and the life she didn't have by forgiving an affair. You killed him. You robbed them both of a life with each other they could have had. The judge in this case actually asked Elize that if she wanted her daughter to have a father, not go through what you did, why did you kill him? However, they made it a compound question and asked after this, what would she tell her daughter? What was the reason? This is why compound questions should not be asked in court. She was asked, why did you kill him? And they should have stopped there. She was then asked about what she'd tell her daughter. She was then asked for the reason, but the amount of questions meant that she didn't have to answer any of the questions. She didn't have to answer why. All she said was she would just ask for her daughter's forgiveness and tell her what happened when the time was right. Ultimately, the jury found that 2 of the 3 aggravating factors, so the motive and the cruelty aspects, were not relevant here, so they threw those out. The defense felt that this was a victory. They felt they were going to get a nice light sentence for Elize. However, the aggravating factor about Marcos not being able to defend himself still came into play. That Elize was the one with the gun. The reason they said that the cruelty aspect, the cruelty aggravating factor was thrown out was because they believed that Marcos was indeed dead when he was dismembered, so he wouldn't have felt that pain. So that cruelty aspect was thrown out. When it came to motive, personally, I think it's because there was no solid evidence defining a single motive. It could have been one of many motives. And there certainly was very poor evidence that this was money-based. However, the prosecution wanted her to get the maximum sentence, which was 30 years. She got 19 years, 11 months, and 1 day. So pretty much 20 years. However, the defense claimed victory here. They say they got 2 of the 3 aggravating factors thrown out and they got her a less than maximum sentence. The prosecution agree that they didn't win either. They managed to get a pretty hefty sentence, but at least one of those 3 aggravating factors was kept into play, so neither really won. It doesn't take away the fact that Elize Matsunaga was found guilty of the 3rd-degree murder of her husband. In 2009, at the time she gave the furlough interview, her sentence was reduced from 19 years, 11 months and 1 day to 16 years and 3 months because she had confessed. So given her time on remand, which was 4.5 years, She has another from now 5 years and 2 months now before she can be released. Elize has not been reunited with her daughter. By killing Elize Matsunaga, not only did she steal their chance from each other of having a life, a father-daughter relationship, but she also stole her daughter's chance of having a relationship with her mother. And like Elize, Helena is being raised by her grandparents. Maru Matsunaga, Marcos's brother, reported that losing his brother was so painful that he teaches his children to always be there and look out for each other. He doesn't want them to ever go through what he went through with Marcos. It's changed him, and it's changed his outlook on people. His cousin said that she finds it very difficult to trust people now. It's not just what Elize did, but the lies she tried to spin. She tried to portray to them, within days of his murder, that she was the victim and that Marcos was the evil one. She had evidence that he was unfaithful, so we'll grant him that. But she didn't need to show the family that. She didn't have to. Even if Marcos had indeed slapped Elize, even if he had been verbally threatening and abusive, a slap in the face versus a gunshot, she had to go and get the gun. And if she could go and get the gun and genuinely feared that a slap would result in an escalation, she should have got her daughter and got out of there, or barricaded herself somewhere. If she'd intended to defend herself, she should have gone for a foot shot or a leg shot and then called an ambulance. She knew by shooting him in the head that it would be fatal. Now, one more thing I'm going to say about this is, if Marcos had slapped her and threatened her with mental institutions, I'm just going to put forward a theory that it could have been that she was going hysterical. She may have been so clearly distressed and maybe in a really bad place mentally that he just wanted her to get some help and didn't threaten to put her in a mental institution, but said, look, you need to go into some sort of place and get help. And he may have slapped her to snap her out of hysteria. But that may have been the catalyst to make Elize so angry, as well as his infidelity, that was enough for her to commit murder. Now, that's only a possibility. He may have slapped her out of anger. He may have threatened her out of malice. It still doesn't excuse what she did. I have been very opinionated in this, but I cannot help it. This really is a very opinionating case. It's very polarizing. But I don't understand why people still support Elize when it's clear she committed murder because she could, because she wanted to. I find it hard to believe that anyone can defend someone who does that, regardless of what's happened to them, regardless of how much of a bad husband the victim was. Murder is never the answer. Anyway, I would like to give a shout out to my 6 lovely channel members: Alison Hempseed, Reality Check, Checking Convictions, Alf, Dentine Shaz and Candy Ray. Thank you so much for your patronage. If you wish to become a member, I'd be very grateful if you could please consider that. But I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you very much, little berries and newberries. Bye!